We now return to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Opportunity Project, the radio show discussing honest truth about Illinois policy and politics. Here's AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan back with Eric Kohn from the Illinois Policy Institute on this edition of Rising. And Eric, one of the best pieces that has been written about Chicago and Illinois' political culture in the last year came recently from Jeff Carter, who writes at his blog, pointsandfigures.com. He's a financial services guy. He was one of the co-founders of Hyde Park Angels. But he writes, he has some very important insights in this piece that he wrote about why Chicago lost Amazon HQ2. Among, there's all kinds of obvious reasons. And then there's something that Jeff Carter hit upon in a way that I haven't heard it explained quite like this before. It's about the closed network in Chicago. The closed network, that's the names that you see when it comes to being tasked to put together a proposal for Amazon, the same names on all of the boards of civic and educational institutions, artistic, cultural institutions, the same names you see on the D2 filings of the most powerful politicians in the state. The same names. And one of the points he makes is that the problem Chicago has, and one of the reasons it lost HQ2, and it will lose other opportunities along those lines, is closed networks are by definition not innovative networks because they're not open to new people and they're not open to new ideas.
They don't want nobody sent.
Yeah,
it's as true now as it was in the 60s and 70s under the Daily Machine when that phrase was first coined. This is fascinating to me because it's absolutely correct. It is the same people. It is the same legacy names. It is the same people who have been involved on both the political and the civic and the business side of Chicago. Amazon's HQ2 to kind of draw this point is also interesting because of the whole way that melodrama, at least to me, played out, that we saw kind of the worst of the instincts of public officials these days, that when Jeff Bezos says jump, they immediately ask how high and is this high enough and can I raise it higher? Whether or not Chicago was even in the running in the first place, if more people can come away with this understanding of the problems facing Chicago, not just the financial ones that we know, but the way that it is the same people running the same operation for their benefit and have been forever, that's a beneficial outcome.
Well, and also, too, the reporting on this, the marketing by both administrations on this, with here you got Rahm, the Democrat, and Rauner, the Republican, the mayor and the governor, two wine club buddies, other parties, but they're going to come together. This is how bipartisanship works, and works for the benefit of the city and the state. Well, just two members of the network.
Yeah. And to be honest, this is how it works, not for the benefit of the city or the state. This is how it works to the benefit, truthfully, of Amazon, because while it's my belief they probably knew going into this where they wanted to end up, they got all of these municipalities to offer up basically, hey, here is all the logistical information you need to know about our cities for a company that is deeply involved in delivery logistics and would want to know all this information. It was a great data mining operation for Amazon.
For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by the author of the piece I mentioned. He is Jeff Carter. Jeff, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. It's good to be here.
So you're not, really a political guy. You're a financial guy, and so I wonder how your foray into political and political culture analysis was received in circles outside of the closed network political circles.
Interesting. I am an out of the closet libertarian, right-wing conservative in the entrepreneurial community in Chicago and in the broader United States. And it has cost me. When I was fundraising for our fund, we actually had a guy commit and then pull out because I was a Republican. And so that has cost me. I think the feedback that I've gotten on this piece is interesting. From the closed network people, I have heard nary a peep. But from everybody else, I've heard you hit the nail right on the head. This doesn't just extend to the greater city of Chicago, but it's in my neighborhood. It's in my neighborhood in Wilmette, where only the right people can run for school board. It's in my neighborhood in North Center, where, you know, only the right people can be a part of certain things when it comes to civic politics. And opinions are crushed. If you really want to, you know, one of the interesting things from my perspective is, you know, I was a trader on the floor of the Mercantile Exchange for a long time, and then I was on the board of directors at the CME, and the CME was both an open and closed network at the same time. You had constant new people coming in with new ideas and stuff, but then you kind of had it run by this cadre of people for years that were entrenched, and we were part of a group that upset the apple cart there with our ideas and then took the CME public. And of course, CME is the largest exchange in the world, the most powerful exchange in the world. Our ideas were right, and that was a cause of opening the network up. And Chicago could do that too, and it has an opportunity still to do it in the entrepreneurial community, but politically it's impossible because of the machine, which City of the Century chronicled. Don Miller's a friend of mine. I was on the board of the National World War II Museum, and he works with that museum, and I read that book, and I said, Professor Miller, that was a great book. And he said, what did you learn? And I said, nothing's changed since 1830. And he goes, that was the point of the book.
Yeah.
And, and you know, Chicago's always been a closed network town, and it has not changed, and it's going to be very difficult to change that culture. And even if you did, it's going to take some exogenous shock to the system to do it, that is unanticipated, and then the network will blow up. And generally when that happens, another new closed network replaces it. And where I learned about this, so I was on the floor and sort of intuitively knew it, but when I got my MBA at the University of Chicago, there's a professor there named Ron Burt who really studied the open and closed networks inside of public companies, corporations, and how they worked and how you could make money from what's called brokerage and closure by being an information provider from one closed group to another. And it was really interesting on how ideas transmit and things like that. And he's mapped out this thing all around the United States. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, my God. And it was just, you see it over and over and over again. Another professor at University of Chicago named Michael Gibbs has studied how to structure your company for the best way to attack a market with your management team. Do you use a closed sort of top-down centralized structure, or do you expand your hierarchy to a flatter organization where you empower people at the ends? And there's no right or wrong way, but you just have to recognize what you're doing.
Jeff,
Chicago is... Yeah.
Jeff, you have, business is one thing, government is another, and we often hear from people running for office that we'll run government just like a business, and there's some differences there that are inherent and immutable. How do you disrupt a closed network in kind of, a government sector as you have identified in this piece? How does that even happen in a way that, it's incentivized in business, like you mentioned with CME Group, but not necessarily in government?
Yeah, so the thing that you have to understand in Chicago is they're tied at the hip. So business and government are tied at the hip in Chicago and the state of Illinois. So there's essentially, in some cases, no difference, right? Especially when you think about property taxes and the fact that businesses have to basically kiss the ring of Madigan to get their property taxes reduced, right? So Madigan can sort of direct some of their strategy, right? So that only certain people get certain favors, or maybe there's some political patronage going on where you hire this guy and we'll drop your property taxes, but it's not, it's a quid pro quo that's unspoken, right? And even Rauner recognized that. I was at a event months ago at the Standard Club where Rauner looked at people, the heads of corporations, and said, look, you guys are part of the problem because you're kowtowing to Madigan to save money on your taxes. And if you wouldn't do that, we would have a chance of breaking it up.
Well, so with respect to this closed network, and yes, Chicago is a hyper-political city, but distinguish it from other centers of entrepreneurial capitalism that are also controlled by the left, San Francisco, New York.
Yeah.
What is different about Chicago? Austin. What is different about Chicago?
Well, if you go to, like, for instance, so to break it up in Chicago, I think the one thing that breaks it up is bankruptcy. So we're rapidly moving to that point, right? So the machine needs patronage. The machine needs these pensions. We can't afford it. Bankruptcy or just outright revolt, where people just say, you know what, we're not going to pay our taxes. So that's what happens in Chicago, which starts to disassemble it. In San Francisco and New York, one of the things I've noticed is, those are towns that are ports of entry. There's a lot of different people coming in and out of there all the time. I hate to say it's immigrant towns, where in Chicago it was always kind of like, where are you from? And everybody sort of knew their history. Like you knew, I was born here, I was a Swedish American, I'm Polish, I'm whatever. In those towns, a lot of times people don't even know. It's not even a topic of conversation. And it's can you do this? And in Chicago, it's where are you from?
So New York and San Francisco, the first question you ask somebody you just met is not where you went to high school. Because right, so there's a frame of reference here that it's not a frame of reference in other more dynamic cities. And then the other problem I would suggest, get your reaction, is what you have is Chicago and Illinois shrinking, and so a lot of talented people leaving.
Oh, totally. So the entrepreneurial community in Chicago, since I started Hyde Park Angels in 2007, has moved exponentially bigger, and it's much better, right? Much better. But it's, if you think about what it could be, it's regressed to where it could be. And in San Francisco, when you walk around, like I was there for a month last year, and it's not like where are you from, where'd you go to school? It's what are you doing, and how can I help you? How can I connect you? New York's like that too. And so it's very transactional. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which has its own merits and feels a little smarmy sometimes. But, when you come up with a new idea, like in my piece I talked about Uber. Uber should have started in Chicago, but if Uber didn't, because nobody would see it. It's too radical. And in 1950, David Ogilvy goes to New York. He wears a kilt on the street. Now, picture a guy from England wearing a kilt on the street and revolutionizing the ad industry. That doesn't happen in Chicago, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting. The difference between how can I connect you rather than how can I freeze you out. That's a big cultural difference. He is Jeff Carter. He's the co-founder, as he just mentioned, I mentioned before, of Hyde Park Angels. And his excellent blog you should check out, including the pieces we referenced and discussed today, pointsandfigures.com. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Good to talk to you.
Good talking to you.